Is knee, and Rohan Connolly joins us. Rohan, you've been chasing up these serious sounding injuries. I gather there might be some optimistic news though.
Yeah, well, I mean, really, it should be the news today should probably be sponsored by the AMA or General Hospital. I mean, it's knees all the way, and there is a bit of a glimmer of hope apparently for Lee Walker, and hopefully he might avoid what would be a fourth knee reconstruction and a very unwanted AFL record, I'd imagine. But the news for Sean Wren today, very bad. Adelaide have confirmed that will be a knee reconstruction. That'll be his second in consecutive years, and both ironically done in the third round of the season. So it's almost 2 full seasons out for him now. Nicky Winmar, I guess it's relatively good news for St Kilda. He's done a torn a medial ligament, but it's not a full reconstruction, so he'll only be out for about 10 weeks. So I guess it's half as bad maybe as St Kilda might have feared last night. But the list of knee reconstructions this year in just 3 rounds and practice matches in the night series is quite astounding, really. You've had Sean Wren, you've had David Schwartz, John Longmire, Chris Groom, Aaron James from Collingwood, John Worsfold last week for the Eagles, and Kent Butcher at Sydney. But I think probably the really significant thing is the number of players who have now done a knee and required a reconstruction more than once. Just this year alone, you've got Longmire doing it again, you've got Wren doing it for a second time. Dean Rice has done his twice now, and of course David Schwartz, as we all know, is now out, has done it for a third time. So I think people are now beginning to ask a few questions of the medical people, and there really just does seem to be a feeling there now that perhaps we've been rushing a few of these guys back too quickly.
Well, we might ask a few questions of our own. Fortunately, the news on 2 of the 3 players who sustained the injuries on the weekend is not as bad as first feared by the sound of it. Nevertheless, alarm bells are ringing early in the season at what appears to be a problem of growing proportion. We're joined by Julian Feller, who's performed several knee reconstructions and is the orthopaedic surgeon charged with caring for Lee Walker's tragic string of knee injuries. Julian, thanks for coming along. Epidemic or just a coincidental early season spate?
I think it's hard to know whether there is in fact an increase in injuries. Hugh Seawood and the other members of the AFL Medical Officers Association have been looking at it over the past 10 years or so, and basically, although there's a bit of variation from season to season, it seems to be there's around about a dozen anterior cruciate ligament ruptures for the AFL as a whole for each season. And it depends a little bit on when those injuries happen. Last year, about the same time of the year, everyone was saying the same sort of thing, that there did seem to be an epidemic. But in fact, in the second half of the season, there were only 1 or 2 injuries. This year, we're probably up to over a dozen already, and it does make one wonder whether the incidence isn't truly increasing. I think Rohan's point is valid too, that now we're seeing players who have had a previous reconstruction collapsing again with that reconstruction rupturing or failing.
But I suppose you'll have to be a little non-committal about that too. Nonetheless, is it possible that the game's physical stresses, its vectors, are perhaps overtaking the medical technology that has been applied to those needs?
There's certainly a lot of discussion about what sort of things are contributing to the injuries to players initially who haven't ever had a knee injury, and then also about the players who are coming back. And the big issue, I guess, that has had attention has been whether players are coming back too early. And I think the bottom line is that no one can really say when too early is. As far as we know, 4 months seems a reasonable time to be getting some players back to at least training, and maybe 6 months to playing, all other factors being equal. But there's a lot of research that needs to be done to sort out these issues.
We're just having a look at a list of half a dozen who are on the way back or already back in 1995, but it certainly doesn't match up to those who have fallen down so far in 96, although, as we've said, the news might be a bit better than first feared on some.
Julian, the players that have come back within that 12-month period, how's your memory to refresh us as to which of those have gone on and had no further problems in the last few years?
Well, the most recent ones are people like Matthew Richardson, who seems to be making an excellent sort of comeback, and there's certainly been a number of players just who have made it back without too much problem. The concern then comes back to these players who are breaking down the second time or maybe even third time around, and there have been about half a dozen of those in the last year.
They seem to be happening with such insignificant or no contact, just falling awkwardly or coming down awkwardly and the knees giving way. That's the thing I think that's surprising us. Someone falling across your knee is
This is Sean Wren last year
year
against St Kilda, and in just a moment we'll see this year's. And this year's is interesting because the television pictures that we saw focus on what we thought was the incident that brought about his second serious knee injury was not the one which actually caused the damage. Apparently that happened a minute or so earlier, and I think we're about to see that at a throw-in. And look at how simple this is. There he is, just lurching away to his right. Now we see it in slow motion, and there's the magic finger pointing to the tragic knee, unfortunately.
What appears to have happened there, Julian? Just looking at that particular last one of Sean Wren.
Well, his foot seems to have been relatively fixed and he's twisted on that knee. And really that's when the anterior cruciate ligament, which is the ligament that's responsible for these tragic injuries, that ligament's under maximal stress when you've got the knee a little bent and when you start to twist on it. But I think that's an important point, that a lot of these injuries now seem to be in a relatively low contact or even no contact situation. And that may have to do something with the speed at which the game's played. It may be due to the physical characteristics of the players. I think if one looks at the players who have had a reconstruction that's broken down, they tend to be the taller players, the higher flying players, and maybe the landing when they come down, as we were talking about before, may be responsible.
What about the theory of the weight work and players increasing their upper body bulk maybe by anything up to 10 kilograms from what they would naturally be? Is that a factor, do you think, in just players potentially being a little top heavy?
I think it allows them to turn with more force. When they're turning, they're spinning a lot more weight around on top, and if the boot or the foot gets caught in the ground, then you're putting more stress across the knee. And I think that's one thing that I know Hugh Seal and his group are looking at together with the AFL Commission. They're looking at a number of factors, including sort of the boots that are worn, and maybe the fact that more injuries do occur in the first half of the season is significant. The grounds are a bit harder, maybe you get a better grip, whereas later in the season when you're twisting, your foot might tend to slip a little bit and take some of the stress away from the knee.
Rohan, just before you ask a question, which I know you do want to ask, we'll have a look at Nicky Winmar and also Lee Walker in just a moment, but Rohan Connolly.
We always used to assume, Julian, that a knee reconstruction was going to be 12 months out of the game, and I think it was Steve Clark at Melbourne in about 1990, came back in 6 months. I just wonder whether that started a bit of a race between surgeons, if you like, and it became more a thing about getting them back quickly than getting them back 100%. Do you think that's a bit unfair, or is there some validity in that?
Well, I think everyone's trying to push things along. I mean, that's the aim of medicine, to try and get recovery faster and better, perhaps. And I think there is a danger, though, that people can sort of get caught up in the hype sometimes around an injury and trying to set a new record and trying to get back before the end of the season. And I mean, obviously surgeons are now looking at this issue, when is too soon, and the players who have broken down seem to have come back fairly early on, although some of them were back at the 12-month mark. As I recall, Clark didn't last all that long afterwards.
Is there more kudos for a surgeon in getting a top-line sportsman back and getting his name in the paper than just doing your average Joe out in the street, or what?
Well, in theory we shouldn't be getting our names in the paper, but I guess there is kudos, or there's some sort of self-esteem, and amongst one's colleagues there's a certain amount of respect if you have got elite players back to playing at the same level. But there is a danger that you're trying to push things too hard to gain some of that kudos, perhaps.
I also spoke to another expert, well, not an expert, but something of an authority in the medical field today, who suggested to me that the newer arthroscopic method of doing a reconstruction perhaps might not leave the joint as stable as the old open surgery, and suggested that maybe we should be harking back a bit. I mean, now, what do you feel about that?
I guess what was associated with the older procedures, the so-called open procedures, was that they often involved more than just reconstructing the anterior cruciate ligament, tightening up the structures on either side of the knee, the inside and the outside of the knee joint. And earlier on there was a longer period of immobilisation. People were in plaster for a while and then braces for quite a long time, whereas now we've tended to get people's knees moving earlier. And the arthroscopic technique certainly seems to result in less trauma to the knee at the time of surgery, which allows the patient or the player to start moving their knee earlier, and that speeds up the whole process right from the word go. I don't know if the arthroscope itself has left the knee more unstable. I mean, if anything, it's causing less disruption in terms of opening up less structures and smaller incisions, but it's perhaps the associated techniques with it, the tendency towards isolating the surgery just to the anterior cruciate ligament as opposed to looking at other structures around the knee as well.
Well, do you think what's happened recently will force clubs to be more conservative about it? I mean, it seems a couple of years in a row now there's been a pretty high toll. It's hard to just write it off as coincidence.
I don't think there's going to be too many players trying to get back the same season.
Julian, how long does it take to do a knee reconstruction? How long's the player in the operating theatre?
Well, that obviously varies from surgeon to surgeon, but and from case to case, depending on how much other surgery there is. But I guess you're looking at about somewhere around an hour and a quarter operating time, depending on whether they've got a torn cartilage, they've torn other ligaments that need to be repaired.
And just, I know the answer to this, but how many could you do potentially in an operating session?
Depends how long the operating session was, but I mean, it's certainly not unheard of to do 4 or 5 in a session.
And a few more arthroscopes as well.
Right, a few more
minor ones. I'm just always amazed that surgeons basically can do maybe a dozen operations in an afternoon, evening. It's amazing when you think of it in those terms, isn't it?
Sure, but I guess that's the sort of day-to-day work that you're doing every day. And
yeah. I'm not trying to say that it's wrong. I'm just saying it's just, you know, when you're not used to thinking of those things, it's like when you're operating, it's the thing you do all the time.
That's right. I mean, for the patient, that's probably a one-off. They'll never have that experience again, hopefully.
Yes.
Julian, thanks for joining us, and on behalf of every
Pleasure.
footballer in the land, we say good luck in your work, and we mean it.
Thank you very much.
Dr Julian Feller, who's an orthopaedic surgeon and working with Lee Walker, upon whom the news is better than we first feared, as it is with Nicky Winmar, but it looks as though the Saints will be without their champion for 10 weeks or so. Coming up in Football Feedback, something even more contentious than knee injuries, umpiring decisions.
This month on the Movie Network, a national story of love and fame from the Pulitzer Prize-winning novel. Starring Antonio Banderas.
I never wanted to be a big shot.
Kathy Moriarty.
You know, you are a knockout, baby.
And Amanda Sante, electrifying as a self-styled master of seduction.
Thinks it's the last Coca-Cola in the desert.
Experience the passion of the Mambo Kings this month on the Network of the Stars.
I hear you guys worship Aussie rules. Hey! What sort of religion is that?
Unbelievable.
Let us take you on a provocative journey into your most erotic dreams and fantasies. Explore your wildest dreams and desires with us. Love, Lust and Lies. Wednesday nights, 10:30 on the Movie Network.
Welcome back, and before we do umpiring decisions, we're going to do things like bribery and drugs. And yesterday's edition of the Sunday Age revealed that players in the AFL, and I've got it here, had been approached to play poorly in league games. The AFL Players Association cooperated in the preparation of a survey which formed the basis of the Sunday Age front page story. Joining us now is the association president, Carlton great Justin Madden. Well, Justin, gambling, drugs, the only thing missing was sex.
Yeah,
no sex in league football?
Right. Well, it's funny you should say that, you know, players have been offered great sums of money to play poorly, because I'd say I've been doing that for nothing for a long time, actually. But, yeah...
Any surprises?
There aren't really. Like, I'm sure the public may be surprised about some of the issues, but what people have to remember is that, you know, football's are normal human beings like everybody else. When you think about the age group that footballers fit into, the ages between 18 and, say, 27, although, you know, I'm beyond that, then those issues are probably pretty relevant. And if you sample a cross-section of the whole community of those age groups, they'd probably give you similar answers to a lot of those issues. Of course, not specifically football ones, but a lot of those issues relating, gambling or drugs or those sorts of issues.
We'll just have a look at a couple of the statistical outcomes which we have illustrated. The first one is the AFL's ban on non-performance enhancing drugs, and of course the AFL says that it's just monitoring that. 38% are happy, 62% aren't. And would you rather miss a game or use a pain-killing injection? Miss a game, 20%, have the injection, 80%. I must say that on the first one, I'm a little surprised at the acquiescence of the Players Association. It did occur to me that I doubt very much that Ross Oakley tests the rest of his staff at AFL House. I wonder what the difference is.
Yes, it's an interesting issue, and a lot of people have raised that, particularly with me and also the association, that we're prepared to go along with that. And I feel very strongly about this because in a lot of the major national sports in America, there is a large drug use problem, and some of the anecdotal evidence is that in the major football leagues and the major baseball leagues, they have their own drug rehabilitation clinics. So often, if you visit one of these teams, they'll say, well, he's coming back from surgery, a knee reconstruction, and drug rehabilitation. And it's just written off like that. It's an accepted thing. And one of the concerns is for the association, if we are able to increase the living standards of the player or his remuneration, particularly if they're youngsters, they may have disposable income. And the other fact is that if they're going to nightclubs, they're exposed to that. They're obviously concerned that there's a level of investigation into their lives, but at this stage it's research, and we're concerned for the well-being of players, and it's a bit of a trade-off. We don't want players with drug problems, but also, it's a concern about the investigation.
Is that any time of the week, not only match day testing, but even if they're tested during the week, the non-performance enhancing drugs are illegal as well?
Yes, well, the way the testing goes is the league will carry out through the Sports Association Drug Testing Authority, I think it is. They will carry out drug testing, and they're looking for performance enhancing drugs. Now, the league will then ask for, at the end of the year, from those drug samples, how the samples corresponded in relation to other drugs, not, I suppose, drugs that may have been used for recreation. So that the general idea is they won't know specifically who has used those, and this was one of the key issues the Players Association were very big on, that they wouldn't be picking out names or players, but they would use that for research. If there's a problem, there may need to be increased education, and also if there's a real dramatic problem that seems to be widespread, then maybe there may need to be some follow-up action related to the Players Association.
Ross Oakley said to me the other day, talking to him about the survey, Justin, that they weren't, he insisted it wasn't a ban, but they just wanted to get a feel, was their quote, for the use of drugs and offer counselling. Now that to me suggests at least a moral judgment. I just wonder if we could potentially end up with a civil rights court case on our hands.
Oh, look, potentially, but I don't think the league are after names or players. That's the impression they've given us, and we're cautiously supporting it. The general idea is that we are concerned for players' welfare, and we want to make sure that players are looked after, and this is one of the concerns, and I'm sure players are very concerned about that. Generally, we just want to make sure that there's not a problem. So in the first year, we'll be looking at the research figures as well.
Here are some more of the stats. Have you had a bet on an AFL match in which you've played? And 13% admit that they have. Have you been offered money to play poorly? Just 1%, but 1% perhaps an alarming statistic to some. We did invite Salim Malik to join us on tonight's program, but he wasn't available. Justin, does that figure surprise you?
Look, no, it doesn't really surprise me. I suppose in these surveys too, you have to allow for at least one fella that may just sort of, do the donkey vote all the way along.
Love to know who those one or two players were.
Maybe somebody's done the donkey vote, but maybe somebody's been offered those figures. I would have been interested to find out the betting players, if they'd betted. I assume they would have betted on their own team winning, but maybe we should ask the question next year: have they ever betted against their team?
Is there a culture of gambling?
I don't think so. I think there may be a culture of having a punt on the horse races, on the stock market, and maybe on football, but not the sort of levels of gambling that we may see in the US, which are ever increasing.
What about, given the rise of the gambling culture, if you like, in Victoria over the last couple of years? I'm pretty sure we asked that question back in 1992 when we first did this survey and got a response of nil. I mean, the fact that we have at least 2 players now who claim to have been offered money, it just suggests to me that gambling is much bigger in football now than even 2 or 3 years ago. I mean, it should be something that the AFL takes heed of.
I'm sure they do. I'm sure they're very concerned about it. In the US, I know that sports betting is bigger than the horse racing industry or any other form of gambling, so that it's a concern that that might flow on to Australia, particularly with the sort of sports bets that take place and being able to bet on anything. I think that's a bigger issue, not only betting on winning or losing, but somebody kicking a bag full of goals or those sorts of things.
Justin, just a quick one before we talk about yesterday's disaster at Subiaco.
Thanks very much.
Performance-enhancing drugs. 4 players.
Yes, we could have done with a few of those yesterday, I think, Tim, if they'd been made available. But no, that doesn't surprise me. I think that's always been an issue. It always will be. Some players will always risk that for the sake of playing well or wanting to play league football. And that's why we have random drug testing on players.
And a quick wrap on yesterday's match at Subiaco. Was it painful for the Blues after that incredible streak? And I think you deserve congratulations on 18 straight, but not really used to losing.
No, we're not, and it'll be interesting to see how that's handled over the next week. But I think that we went into the game with a depleted team. I'm not making any excuses here, but a depleted team, and Fremantle were fantastic in their endeavour for the ball. We probably didn't go in expecting that sort of endeavour, and they caught us off guard and continued it all day long, and they really were a fantastic team yesterday.
There seems to be a view among a few players I've spoken to that they could really be a surprise packet this year. I mean, how do you see them now?
Well, I think they've got an interesting style of game, as we mentioned last year, but they've developed it, worked on their skills, and they've certainly improved their game plan and their style of play.
I'm sure you're looking forward to running them off their legs when you get them to Optus Oval a little later in the season.
I think I might need a few performance-enhancing drugs to do that, Tim. Thanks very much.
Don't go away, because we're going to involve you in our next segment. Rohan Connolly, thanks very much for joining us again this week, and we'll see you next week. David Levins, the umpire's coach, will be in to occupy Rohan's seat.